Hello guys, today I want to make a comparison between these two synthesizers, I mean the Prophet 510 and the Oberheim OBX8. At the end of the video I will tell you my final thoughts about these two synthesizers. So let's start and dive in to check the oscillator section and to see the similarities and the differences between these two synthesizers. Let's go on the Prophet. This is a simple sawtooth wave. On Oberheim you may notice that it's more brilliant, so it's because you need to activate the full keyboard tracking of the filter. And now they sound very similar. About the oscillator, on the Oberheim you have two oscillators that are identical. They have a sawtooth wave, they have a pulse wave, and they have a triangular wave. On the Prophet 10 you have the oscillator A that has only sawtooth and pulse wave, and the oscillator B it's with sawtooth, triangular, and pulse wave. The difference is that here you can select both the sawtooth and the pulse wave at the same moment, but if you want a triangular wave you need to deselect both of them. So it's not possible, like for the Prophet, to activate all these three waveforms. I won't show the pulse wave. Okay, this is they are pretty identical, but there are some differences. For example, on the Prophet 510 the pulse width it's bipolar, so you can go whereas on the Oberheim so it's a little bit different. And also there is one choice, projectual choice, that you have just one knob that is giving you the pulse width of both oscillators. So if I move like this I will iterate at the same time oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. But if I want just to move the width of one oscillator, I just press this oscillator and move this knob. So in this case I am just changing the width of the oscillator 1. On the Prophet you have two knobs that will define the width of the two oscillator square waves. Anyway, let's go on and select the sawtooth and the pulse together on both synthesizer. Here you can notice that they are very different, and when you activate a pulse wave together with the sawtooth wave, it will create some harmonics that that are also different if you go in page 2 of the OBX8, where you can choose, where is here, okay, oscillator square mode. In this case, by default is selected the OB8. You can choose the OBX8. But this give you the opportunity to make like some phasing effect. In the next video I will show some sound design tips on this Oberheim. Next we have the sync button on both synthesizer, but in the case of the Oberheim, it's the oscillator 2 that is synced to the oscillator 1. I will show. It's steppy, so you have each value of semitones, but of course if you link this to the filter envelope, and you will not hear anymore the values going step. It's working at the opposite. I mean that it will be the oscillator A to be synced to the oscillator B. Again is steppy. So they work even if the synced oscillator it's not the same, but they work pretty similar. And another thing that I want to mention, that on the Prophet 510 you have here the values of the notes. You can read the notes on the OBX8. You don't have on the display the name of the notes. And another thing, the OBX8 has more pitch excursion. I mean, the Prophet 10 goes from C0 to C4. Here it can go. Let's go on the modulation of the oscillators of both synthesizers. Here they start to be different, and you have cross modulation on the OBX8. That is the second oscillator that is modulating the first oscillator. And in this case, when this light is lit, it's a sawtooth wave that is modulating the oscillator 1. As you can hear, there are atonal sound without any tuning, but metallic. And the only thing that you can do, because you don't have an amount of this cross modulation, the only thing that you can do is to play with the pitch of the oscillator to if in this case the oscillator 2 is closed, so you will not hear the oscillator 2, but I just linked the oscillator 2 pitch to the filter, to the envelope generator of the filter. So if we will give maximum modulation and pretty slow time of attack and decay, and the sustain will be down. But you have also another option that is hidden in the page 2 menu. There is oscillator to triangle X modulation. In this case, it's a triangular wave of the oscillator 2 that is modulating the oscillator 1, and you, with this knob, you can choose the amount of the modulation. So in this case, it's more easy to achieve some tuned sounds. Let's go to the oscillator modulation on the Prophet. And to me, you have more possibilities, because the Prophet has the polymodulation section that is a simple but a genial idea of Dave Smith. And here you can see that you have 3 destination of modulation. One is the frequency of the oscillator A, the pulse width of the oscillator A, and the filter. So in this case we will choose the frequency of the oscillator A. Let's go on C1. Now I will start modulating the oscillator A with the oscillator B, and I'm choosing a triangular wave to modulate this oscillator. Let's increase the value, the amount of the modulation. As you can see, the more far I go from the oscillator B to the oscillator A in tones, in semitones and tones, more audible it will be this effect. So in this case I have C0 on the oscillator B and C3. Not to mention if I put in unison mode. The modulation with the triangular wave is the most stable and the easiest to use when you want to modulate the oscillator A. But I will show you now with using a pulse wave to modulate the oscillator A. Anyway, I checked that moving the pulse width of the oscillator B, you can change the note of the oscillator A. Anyway, it's very dissonant, and you can, of course, you can activate the three waveforms and modulate the oscillator A. The result is not always the same because we are talking about an analog synthesizer, so it's a little bit unpredictable what you will have. And another thing that you have on the Prophet 10 that it's useful every time you need to make a fine tuning about this strange sound, you have as you can hear, to me it's more usable, and I'm not mentioning, for example, that here you can also modulate the frequency of the oscillator A with the filter envelope. On the OBX8 you have only this modulation that will take effect on both on filter and on the modulation of the oscillator too. Here, if I just move this and I assign like as a destination the frequency of the oscillator A, I can have dependent amount that is not depending on the amount that I set on the filter. So for example, So as you can see, this is controlling the amount of the filter envelope on the pitch of the oscillator 1. This is controlling the amount of the filter envelope on the filter and not going to modulate the frequency of the oscillator A. This is better for me because you have two amount section where you can decide what you want. After I will talk about the oscillator B as an LFO when we will talk about the LFO. Let's go to talk about the mixer section. For the use, this is better for me because you have a mixer, so you have level of the oscillator A, level of the oscillator B, and level of the noise generator. And you can set without going in a menu and something like this. On the Oberheim, you have just the switch to switch on oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, and both of them, they will be by default at 127, so at their maximum. So if you want to control the volume, the level, you need to go in page 2 and put down the level or increase the level of one of them. And the same it's for the noise generator, that when you switch on is by default at 127, so you need to go down to have just a little bit of noise. There is also the possibility to assign by global. You need to set it in global section when this page 2 is lit, to assign to some knobs the control of some other parameters. But I found it a little bit not comfortable for me, because you need to remember that page 2 is activated. So for example, you want to move the frequency of the filter and you move, but you see that is another thing that you are moving because page 2 is lit. On the filter section, we have very different synthesizer here, because the Prophet has only a 4-pole filter, resonant, that can work in revision 3 mode or revision 1 and 2 mode. They are a little bit different at certain values. To me, when you have a big amount of resonance and you make a filter sweep, for example, now I find that the revision 1 and 2 is more aggressive, especially with the resonance. You will hear the resonance more pronounced on it. So for the Prophet you have just these two filters that are two low pass 4-pole filter. You can have, of course, you can have the envelope amount like in every synthesizer. No synthesizer, you have an ADSR envelope, so nothing special and nothing more. You can have the keyboard tracking of the filter. So here you have 50% of keyboard tracking, here you have 100% of keyboard tracking. And with 100% setting you can choose using very high values of resonance. So it's very easy to achieve sound like organ and something like this. Let's go on the OBX8, and here you will have a lot of options. From the panel you can access to the two-pole filter of the OBX, two-pole filter of the OBX8, and four-pole filter of the OBX8. Again, one oscillator. But in the case of the Oberheim, they are not resonant, so they will not self-oscillate. Maximum value of resonance. And also for the two-pole OBX8. And also for the four-pole. But again, if you will go in page 2, here you have all the 6 filters. So in this case, we have the OBX SEM two-pole low pass, the SEM two-pole band pass, and here no light is lit because we are in page 2 to select a filter that is not selectable from the front panel. After you have, sorry, it was a high pass filter. After you have a band pass filter. After you have a two-pole notch filter or band reject. So on side of filter, the OBX8 has much more possibilities in shaping sounds. So it's a very big strength of this synthesizer, and also here they are very different because here you can create very resonant sound, and here you cannot, but this filter is very smooth, is very musical, it's really incredible. And another thing to mention is the keyboard tracking here, that here can be just off and on. So off is 0, on is 100%, but again if you go in page 2 you will see filter keyboard tracking that by default is 127, so it's like 100%. And here you can decide how much keyboard tracking you want on the filter, whereas on the Prophet 510 you can just choose off, 50 and 100%. Here you have of course an amount on the filter envelope. The filter envelope is a very basic ADSR, so like on the Prophet nothing changed. I think that I covered everything about the filter. Let's go to the modulation section. Here you have this switch of velocity that can affect the filter, the volume, or both of them. You have the aftertouch that can affect the filter, and the modulation of this LFO. You have the unison button, whereas on the Prophet you have unison, and if you keep pressed this, you can choose with the decrement and increment, you can choose how many voice you want to stack, and with this program select button you can choose the detuning between these voices. So here it's just a little bit of detuning, more. So here you can activate the unison, and on page 2 again you will go to select the tune range between the voices. And here you can choose how many voices you want to assign to be stuck together. Here you have the velocity controlling the filter, controlling the volume, the amplitude. You have the aftertouch that is controlling the filter, and it's controlling here the LFO, or both of them, of course. On the Prophet, before they were just on and off. Now with the last firmware update you can decide how much you want that they are modulating the destination. On the Oberheim it's also possible with the last firmware update. Just one thing that I noticed, but maybe I'm doing something wrong, that the aftertouch is modulating, of course, but even if I go down with the aftertouch amount, nothing will change. This amount is just working when I want to modulate the filter. So I have less modulation. On the LFO section, here we have very different synthesizers, because on the OBX8 you have a sine wave, you have a square wave, you have a sample and hold wave, and you have two destinations with two different amount knob. On the first one you have oscillator 1, oscillator 2 and filter. On the second one you have pulse width modulation of both oscillator and also the amplifier section. You have also other waveform. For example, if I press simultaneously the sine wave and the square wave, you will have an up ramp, and if you press the square and the sample and hold simultaneously, you will have a down ramp wave. And whereas on the Prophet you have an up ramp wave, a triangular wave, and a square wave. You can switch on these three waveforms together and you can have some different waveforms, but they cannot be triggered by the keyboard, so they are free running, so you need to, when is the moment to press the keyboard to go in time. I will show you something like have also the possibility to use just one oscillator as a sound source and to degrade this oscillator V to an LFO. You will do this going to low frequency, and here you can choose, of course, the three waveforms. And there is another thing, that here my frequency knob, it's going from this A note, okay, in Italian it's La, to C9, so you will have a very different range. So let's say that I want with oscillator B control the filter. Of course, because here it's not only one, but you have 8 voices. Here you can have different time on the modulation. And also you can, if you switch on the keyboard, you can have the keyboard tracking, so at so you can have very crazy effect about this. Of course, you can use also to modulate the pulse width of. In this case, with the keyboard button activated, keyboard switch activated, you can have different speed of the modulation of the the oscillator A, of the pulse width of the oscillator A, you can have different speeds. Here on the Prophet you have the frequency A, frequency B, the pulse width A, pulse width B, and the filter, like the five destination of the modulation wheel. But there is something to mention about that. Here you have a new knob that it was not on the vintage Prophet. That is the initial amount that will set an amount of the modulation even if the wheel is down. So for example, so this is the amount. If I will turn the wheel, it will increase this value. Another thing to mention about this LFO of the Prophet is that the sawtooth wave, the ramp up wave, and the triangular wave, they are bipolar, and the square wave is unipolar, so it means that you can make trills. If you want to have an octave, you can use the wheel to increase this value that is already at maximum. So you can play something like this. Another thing that I want to talk about the LFO of the Prophet 10510, it's also that here you have a knob that will mix between an LFO and a noise source, so you can modulate these five destinations with an LFO or with a noise source. Of course, again, you can also mix between them. I will very fast show. And again, for me, here it's another strength point of the Prophet 510 versus the Oberheim, because here you have a dedicated knob. I understand that this synthesizer is simpler than the OBX8, so it is more like a ready to go synth without going in sub menus. But anyway, as already someone told in video, on this synthesizer you have so much space to use with other buttons, switches and knobs, so I think that they could also do it. Let's go to the LFO section on the OBX8. Let's again. Okay, here you have a lot of things to do. First, you can synchronize is the LFO with the trigger on the keyboard. I will not talk about this, the possibility of both of them. Of course, if you have a Prophet 10 or a Prophet 5 with the upgrade of these 5 voices, you can split or layer sounds. Sadly, you cannot allocate voices, so for example, you cannot have a mono sound on the left, and so you will have 9 voices that you can use on the right side, but they will be 5 and 5 on the upper part. On the OBX8 it's the same, but on the OBX8 you have dedicated switches to decide if you want to split, double, and here you can control the panel for the lower and the upper part. Anyway, coming back to the LFOs, I wanted to talk about the LFO of the Oberheim that is more complex. As I told you before, you have more waveforms. Before I go deeper in this, I want to say that you also have another LFO that is dedicated to vibrato with different waveforms that again you need to choose on page 2 here. It is the vibrato LFO wave that you can choose: triangle, square, saw up, sample and hold, saw down, and noise again. Anyway, talking about the LFO that is on the panel, you have the same waveforms. You can modulate oscillator 1, oscillator 2, filter, pulse width modulation 1 and 2 oscillator, and volume. But what is different here is that you have something that you can choose, and not only the keyboard trigger, the trigger point of the LFO, you can choose, for example, the modulation delay time. It means how much time the modulation will start after that you press a key. So, for example, let's okay, now the modulation starts as soon as I hit the keyboard. So now let's go. Modulation delay time, I will set to maximum. It will start after a period of time, but it will start at the maximum. But if I modify the attack time of this modulation, you will see that this modulation will grow up gradually. I will put away this delay time. You can also choose the envelope type, if it's normal or inverted, and after I will explain you what does it mean. You can use also the modulation one quantize set to on. So for example, let's put away the modulation attack time. You have also the same for the second destination, and here there is also modulation to envelope. We set the modulation to attack time to 127, so it is maximum. Let's choose a down sawtooth wave. The decay time we will choose how much long it will be. Of course, you have also to choose inverted on the envelope type. Of course, you have the master tune knob. Sadly, again, you don't have a reference like on the Prophet 10. Here you have the master volume. Here you have the balance between when you are using a split or a stack double sound. You can balance between them with this knob. Here you have the old button and the chord button. On the Prophet, the chord is hidden with beneath this unison switch. I mean, when you will press and press unison, it will go on the chord. So now with one note it will repeat the chord that I was playing before. Okay, I want to talk now about the modulation that is on the left hand panel of the Oberheim. You have modulation is lit, and here you can decide the depth and the rate of the modulation. Here you can decide where to send this modulation, oscillator 1, oscillator 2, or both of them. Here you can choose the pitch bender, that if it will work only for the oscillator 2, and here you can choose the amount of the lever that after will be linked to what you set in page 2. So let's start with modulation. In this case we have a triangular wave. Again, on page 2 you can set the waveform. You can apply on both oscillator. The LFO, to me, it's fast enough to create some audio modulation. Let's put away the modulation, and here we can apply apply just on the oscillator 2. And here, if I just press this switch, it will be plus minus 12 semitone. But for this you can change the amount. So for example, I will go to 5 semitones. Or 7, so it's a fifth. Here you have the transpose buttons, and here you have the control for the lower and the upper part of the Oberheim in case you have a split or double patch. Talking about the arpeggiator, we have a different arpeggiator from other synthesizers. So if I activate the arpeggiator, in this case it's going random because the two switches are both off. With the rate you can choose the speed of the arpeggiator. If you sync the rate to an external clock via USB or the arpeggiator jack, you will have it will be synced, but you cannot choose 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, so it will be just synced to the speed. So you have here, you have up, and if you press the Arp and you change these 6 switches, you will have 2 octave, 3 octave, 4 octave, 5, 6. There is a hidden function how Oberheim state in manual. I was a little bit confused how they described it, also because I am not English or American, and I am Italian, so it's a little bit also more difficult for me to understand. If you hold down the mode button and the arpeggiate, you can choose the note that you want to be played in the arpeggiator, and you can choose up to 5 notes. So I will activate the arpeggiator. In this case nothing is happening because it's this switch is the first one is lit. If I will switch on the second one, you will hear 2 notes. 3, you will hear 3 notes. Sorry, there are 6 notes. that you need to press one key. You don't have to take a chord. Another thing that you can do with this is that if you press two keys together, and you can also play with the notes. So as you can see, these switches are still affecting the direction of the arpeggiator. So, like in normal mode, you have down, and up, and random. So I think that I covered pretty much what we have to say about these two synthesizers, and both of them, they are very beautiful, they are great sounding, and I'm very happy I bought both of them. I feel really lucky to own these two beautiful synths. I also have a Moog 1 16 voices, and if I compare these two synthesizers with the Moog 1, I can say that the Moog 1 it's difficult to program. It's difficult to have very beautiful sound because the Moog 1 has a very small sweet spot. I'm not telling that the Moog 1 is sounding bad like a lot of people saying. I don't think so. I also programmed patches on the Moog 1 that, in my opinion, and in opinion of who bought these patches, they sound very good. So I'm not telling that it's sounding bad. I'm just telling that the Moog 1 deserves more attention. It wants more effort when you program a sound, because it's so complex and you can program almost everything you want, and we are talking about an analog synthesizer. Of course, on the Moog 1 there are also digital effect. On these two synthesizers there are not digital effect, no effect at all. I hooked up on my mixer an Eventide H90, and I am very happy with this. Even if it's digital, to my ears it sounds great. And anyway, I not agree with people that say you have an analog synthesizer, you put this digital effect, because in any case, when you are recording the sound, you are going into your DAW that is digital. So I really don't know why arguing about this. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any question or something, because of course I 100% I forgot to talk about something. If you have question, comments, you can write. Support on my channel, subscribing, sharing this video, put like, because for you it's not hard, not difficult, and for me it will be a big help to the growth of my channel. I will make some videos about sound design tutorials with the OBX8 and maybe with the Prophet 10. It depends on how much replies I will have, because this video, it took a lot of time to be captured, to be edited, and so on. So see you next time.